Welcome to Politics Done Right on KPFT. I am your host, Egberto Williams. This is the progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. Give me a call at 713-526-5738. That is 713-526-KPFT. Remember, you can also send me a tweet to EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Williams. Let us engage. It is politics done right. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to Politics Done Right, folks. How are you guys doing this afternoon? Roxy, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Egberto. How are you?
Well, I am great, but guess what happened? For a minute, I was looking through the door. I didn't see Roxy. And Roxy appeared, and I said we were going to have a great show today.
Yes, I'm sorry for running late, but I'm here. I wouldn't leave you out to hanging out to dry.
I always knew that, though. I always knew that. But you know, folks, what are we going to talk about today? I met George Batten when working on the 2008 Obama campaign. After the campaign, we lost contact for some time. A few years later, I saw him, guess where? At the gym. You know, he's a real professional type, swim master and all that good stuff. In fact, he looked at me and he said, Egberto, I'm going to put you in there and shame you in the pool. But hey, what can I say? At first, I didn't remember how we met. So eventually, George remembered that we met at the Obama campaign. In 2012, a few Kingwood Area activists got together and created Occupy Kingwood in solidarity with Occupy Wall Street movement. We rallied at the corner of Kingwood Drive and Westlake at Westlake Houston Boulevard every Saturday morning for 52 consecutive weeks. Rain or shine, heat or cold, and George was there most of the times. I invited George Batten to be a part of it. He did not hesitate. He was there almost every week. As one can imagine, I had a lot of time to speak with George about just about every issue. He, however, had a passion. He told me he knew how to cure the discipline problem in the inner city schools. He was passionate about it. He said, "This isn't conjecture, I've done it." George Batten said he did it in his school, and he's written quite a bit about it. But before we start, I want to get off subject a bit because, as it turns out, this week was kind of an interesting week. Net neutrality took a hit, folks, and for those people who don't know what net neutrality is, I'm going to talk about that in the blog piece that I'm going to do.
It's time for the weekly blog post.
Okay, folks, here is the news about net neutrality. This week, net neutrality was once again placed on notice. The door is being opened to a privileged network. Those with money may be afforded the ability to smooth, speedy access, while those without, marginality. The internet is an integral part of American life. It is how we communicate. It is how we entertain ourselves and others. It is how we do business. It is a utility and should be regulated as such with equal access for all. The encroachment on our liberty continues. This is not one of the standard right-wing Tea Party, don't tread on me, baseless phrases, folks. This one is real. It is not the government overtly treading on us. It is government policy paid for by the plutocracy legalizing the theft of our democracy by all means necessary. It is the rebirth of the American oligarchy. It is no longer just a feeling or conjecture that we are losing our democracy. This week, the Washington Times reported about a new study that revealed as much. In the study, testing theories of American politics, elites, interest groups, and average citizens, research compared 1,800 different U.S. policies that were put in place by politicians between 1981 and 2002 to the type of policies preferred by the average and wealthy American, or special interest groups. The central point of that emerges from our research is that economic elites and organized groups representing business interests have substantial independent impacts on U.S. government policy, while mass-based interest groups and average citizens have little or no independent influence, the study found. The study also found when a majority of citizens disagrees with economic elites and or with organized interests, they generally lose. J.P. Suttle, writing for Consortium News, put it even more gravely. He said, "These findings are more daunting when we consider that the study's data set ends before Citizens United and sanctification of money as constitutionally protected speech and the growing post-crash spike in inequality." But one word the authors did not use to describe the ruling class was oligarchy. Americans want a democracy. Americans believe they still live in a democracy. They believe this because those that control the airwaves, the print media, and most means of communications continue to promote that fallacy. Inasmuch as most Americans know there is something wrong, they cannot grasp it. The traditional media as arms of a plutocracy won't tell. The implicit loss of freedom based on a void of causal information is a house of cards for the middle class. And the end of their struggle, there's nothing left. And most do not know why. That is why the plutocracy depends on it. A few months ago, I co-authored a Move to Amend piece titled, "Is Net Neutrality Really Necessary? You're Damn Right." In the piece, we stated the following: news channels on both radio and television inundated Americans. Yet on any given day, the political narrative on every TV and radio station seems to allow the same narrow topics. Where are the stories about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the China's investment in Africa, the persecution of death of Aaron Swartz, the continuing fallout from Fukushima, and dozens of other underreported or ignored stories? When 6 corporations control more than 90% of the media does not inform, it indoctrinates. Corporate media provides selective information, often unreliable for the express purpose of controlling public opinion, rather than informing it. The mainstream corporate media giants cannot be trusted to accurately report, period. Many view the channelization of the internet between premium traffic and standard traffic as yet another income stream for business. Others actually support it under the failed belief that one should have the right to pay for faster, more reliable service if they desire. That is flawed thinking. If miles when the rich are afforded unlimited, or rather, that is flawed thinking if one considers the internet a road. Would you want to force poor and middle class people to drive 40 miles when the rich are afforded unlimited speeds? More time forced to be on the road is less time available to amass income and wealth. A self-perpetuating demise of progress. The same applies to the internet. There is, however, a more sinister concern: the distribution of news and information. Now more than ever, Americans are responsible for finding their own sources of fact-based information. Most of this information can only be found via independent websites and blogs. These alternative sources of information provide non-corporate written news, podcasts, and videocasts. The internet is their basic transport. The tenets of net neutrality are vital. All data packets must be treated equally throughout the internet. Specific services like streaming file transfers must be restricted. Websites cannot be blocked by ISPs. People's movement are dependent on the internet and social networks, using video and audio communication tools like Skype and Maestro. They transmit live feeds via tools like Ustream. The world was provided video in real time from the Occupy Wall Street movement, the Iranian Green movement, and the Arab Spring. The potential change in regulation put these all at risk. These efforts will be futile unless the internet is recognized for the utility that it is and places ISPs under the same scrutiny as telecommunications utilities. Absent this, it is not democracy at risk, but it is the end of democracy. Great. I am actually very happy today to have my good friend George Batten here. George, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, Egberto.
Look, let me tell you, thank you very much for coming. I want to tell you guys a story before. And Terry, I'm going to be coming to you next, but I just want to get George started here. George called me up and George said, hey, I've been doing this writing on these changes that we can make in the inner city to actually get things changed, to actually make things better. And we sat down and we were having a cup of coffee and I said, hey, George, I was going to be talking net neutrality today, but I was also going to be taking up another subject. But you know what? The other subject is a green subject. This one I think is important. Why don't you come on the show? And he's like, oh, really? Now? It's like, yeah. So, George, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Egberto.
I really appreciate that. Now, George, tell me a little bit about yourself.
I was an inner city teacher in the Houston Independent School District for 11 years. I was 4 years at Dede Middle School, where I was a physical education teacher, and I spent 7 years at Austin High School, where I taught history for a while. I was a swim coach and did a little PE, so along that line.
Now, you know what I love with what you told me? I remember when we were standing up at the corner of Occupy Kingwood, you were saying, we really have to do something about education. We must do something about education. But first of all, we have to get discipline taken care of first. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, education is the key to everything. Well, discipline is the main problem that we have in our schools today. And all these other solutions, they don't work unless you get your discipline under control. So we go from there. Yeah.
Now, when you talk about discipline, tell our folks what you mean by discipline. Why is discipline such a problem in the inner city as you saw it? And you have some concepts that we spoke about at Starbucks yesterday.
Yeah. Before I go to the concepts, I should say I was made discipline chair of Austin High School right after the walkout that made national news. I came the next year with Hilbert Bludow, who was the principal. Came in to work with him, and he got transferred to another school, but caught up in the situation. And part of the shared decision-making committee and being a discipline chair was we had to find solutions or try to figure out solutions so we could have a better school. And so through that process, we started working on discipline. And what I found as the discipline chair was that everybody was arguing with everybody. Everybody was transferring blame for the problem to each other, and no solutions were coming down the pike, so to speak. So it was just a process of getting out there and trying to figure out how to solve this discipline problem. And as we worked through it, we argued for months about it. And then Judy Dew, who was the economics teacher at school, got up with the dictionary. And to start the whole process of solving discipline, you have to have a definition of discipline. And discipline is a set of consequences for bad behavior, often unpleasant, that will make you change your behavior. And the ultimate goal of discipline is to become self-disciplined. And when you take this discipline definition and apply it to our schools, you start to see where the problems are at. If we don't have consequences that really change children's behavior in the schools, and we definitely don't have as the ultimate goal to discipline to make children self-disciplined. So that's why we have so many problems in the school. But as I worked through the problem, I learned how to change behavior and get people in a class. Austin High School at that time had 3,100, 3,400 students. I would say at least 1,000 to 1,500 would stay out in the hallways all during the day, go to 3 lunches, and so it was a sort of a wide open school. Now, how do you get all those kids in school? And we need to talk about the consequences, but Kids weren't afraid of the consequences. They're not afraid of detention. They're not afraid of suspension at school. Expulsion is ruled out as an option, which we can discuss why later on. But I found that the one thing that they were really afraid of, or not afraid of, but didn't like, was what I call lecture and pester. They didn't like to be lectured about their behavior, and they didn't like to be pestered about it. Now, the other part of it is, as an adult, we have to control the schools. We can't allow the students to control the school. So you get out before the bell, and you have to become the big dog in the school. You have to start controlling the hallways. Let's go. Let's break it up. The big voice in the hallway. As adults, we have to take control of the situation. And most of our schools, when they get out of control, the students are in control of the situation in the school.
Right. Excellent. I need to do a station idea. I love that concept. Folks, the telephone number, it's a call-in show, is 713-526-5738. Again, that number is 713-526-KPFT. We're Houston, KPFT FM 90.1. Terry, come on in and join the discussion. How you doing, my friend?
Romano, how are you?
Excellent. How have you been, my friend?
Oh, great.
Good. Make your point, my friend.
Well, I've listened to what the educator said, and I agree wholeheartedly that once you lose discipline, all is lost. However, as I typically do, I have a slightly different perspective, and that is I fall back to my maxim that there are no external solutions to internal problems.
Mm-hmm.
The problems with discipline stems from a lack of internal drive and motivation of the student, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm certainly not a teacher, so I speak from less than a fully informed perspective. However, having raised two children through high school and through college, I have a somewhat unique understanding of the issue. The problem, in my opinion, stems from the fact that too many children have no motivation to to become competent or minimally competent, let alone achieve in the school system. The parents don't enforce an educational structure. The siblings haven't achieved anything educationally. Many of these kids come from parents who have either not graduated middle school or high school, and they are looking at perhaps being the first one in their family to graduate from high school, and it's just a structure internally where educational excellence or educational achievement is not focused on.
Right.
Egberto, you and I have had the discussion many times about our own children,
right,
where the discussion was never whether or not they were going to go to school. From the earliest time, they were told, you will go to college and you will graduate.
Exactly. Now, let me throw the question to George in this fashion, because what you brought up is quite interesting, Terry. George, a lot of the students that you're with in that school is exactly what Terry says, which is these are people that they don't have the backing, the parental backing, and that sort of stuff. How does the program that you are talking about take into consideration that those particular students that you're dealing with are the most at-risk students with not a whole lot of backing from their families?
Well, that kind of goes into what I call transfer of blame.
Mm-hmm.
Teachers blame administrators, administrators blame teachers, parents blame teachers. It's all back and forth. When you don't have a solution to the problem, you start transferring the blame. What I learned as a teacher in the inner city, there's hard-working people down there. There's families with both parents are working. Kids want to be successful for their families. So this concept that the skills aren't there, that the desire is there. The problem is the discipline's not there. Does that make sense?
So before I ask Terry to come in on this, let me ask you the question this way. I think you're.
What I'm saying is I'm not going to go into that and say it's the parents' fault, it's the child's fault. I'm going to tell you it's the way we run our discipline, and you're on the right path. And then eventually we'll talk about behaviorist theory and how that's affected the United States. But,
right. Now, when you talk about not setting blame, I think one of the tenets that you want to get across is there are problems with the parents, but just maybe if we actually had teachers in these particular schools following a particular procedure or particular plan, that you can actually mitigate some of the problems that they have at home?
You could. Because once you get discipline established in school, it's going to transfer to the home in some respects, because we're talking about internalizing, self-discipline. the whole process. That's the process of lecture and pester. It's a system of questioning. Why are you doing this? It doesn't make sense. You set goals. We're trying to have a better school. Can you do it? Do I have to go to your parents? Do I have to treat you as a child? Can you do this for yourself? All these things. You set goals for the school. You set goals for the student. What you're doing with lecture and pester is getting rid of all these arguments that they have.
Why don't you explain what lecture and pester is? Because I think that is your concept of how do you get into the kids, these kids that some people look at this way.
That was the process. Mm-hmm. When I came out in the hallways to get the hallways under control, we have 4 assistant principals. We have 5 police officers in school, but they can't control the situation. The offices are filled up with kids with problems, being sent there for tardy. The process is not there. Now they're going to give out the consequence of an hour detention. When they come back to the teacher and throw that piece of paper in the teacher's face and say, I'm not going to detention, the school process doesn't catch up to them. Now through lecture and pester, I eliminated the office, just kind of stumbled onto it. Start lecture and pester. I catch up to you in the hallway, Alberto, what are you doing out in the hallway? Well, you're going to answer me. Are you a good guy or a bad guy? Well, it's none of your business. Well, no, sir, it's my business. We're going to try to have a better school. And then you work this process. Why are you out in the hallway? What are your goals? You know, you just talk, but you put pressure on them. You can do it, and I'm going to be there with you, whatever. Now, they think what's happening is they know they can game the system. But when you do this, you find out immediately who's a good guy and who's a bad guy. And you start working in manners. Yes, sir, and no, sir. A good kid will say, yes, sir, I think I can do this. I can discipline myself and get out of the way. So the process is that you're pushing the guys that can change your behavior. The ultimate indicator whether a guy is good or bad is whether he can change his behavior. And you keep the pressure on. Now I run across you the second or third time. Hey, Berto, all those excuses you gave me for, they're not worth anything. Here you're still at home. Look over here. These guys are going to class. How come you can't go to class? You set the tone and the attitude. And when I started out, I thought if I could get 80% of the students into class on time, I had done a great job. Now, I talk about paradigm changes in thinking, which I'm saying that's what you need right here. Eventually, it came to about 99% of the kids in the school can change their behavior because the pressure is put on them. Eventually, the only guys that can't change their behavior, that's the ones you send to the office. That's the ones you send to DRC, or that's the one that sends to the alternative school.
So your contention is that there are some of these students that fall on that borderline that you can get to, as tough as they may be, you can get to, and then the very few that's left you send to the office.
That's right. Most kids want a safe school everywhere. Parents want their kids educated, so it can be done.
Terry, you and I, in dealing with our kids, we never had to worry about them being in certain types of environments. How do you feel about that? That maybe in these tougher environments, the discipline from the teachers don't just take that necessary interest, as George says, to do the lecture and pester, meaning not allow them to simply get away with it because it's the easier thing to do.
Well, George, I don't want this to sound like what it's going to sound like, which is simply a refutation of your idea. But my question is, when in the lecture and pester mode,
yes, sir,
is that not taking time away from your function as an educator?
No, in the long run, when you correct 99% of the behavior in the school, you're spending less time on discipline.
Okay,
it's to put the pressure back on the students.
But stay with me in a moment.
Yeah.
In the moment where you disengage your role as teacher to engage your lecture and pester,
I'm a teacher as I do the lecture and pester.
Function of being an educator.
Sir?
Or do you see it all as one and the same continuum?
Absolutely. Lecture and pester is part of. That's what we're talking about. You want a school that's under control. You want kids that have goals and ideas of what they want to do. That's worked into it. First part of discipline. Once you have discipline, now you can set goals for yourself and for your school. True.
Well, I have a different experience because I've taught martial arts for 28 years.
Fine.
And so I have a dynamic at work where, or not at work, but when I teach martial arts, I have children who are deemed recalcitrant, disobedient, hard-headed, problem child. Yet I can get them to say, yes, sir, and
absolutely
snap to attention without any problem.
Right.
Of course, I'm 6'4", 240 pounds, so that helps a lot. But
well,
at the
it
same
may
time,
help.
when the class is over, that child who has just been saying yes, sir, to me for an hour will run right out to his mother or father and go, what?
Right.
So I have an issue with these externalities that are not reinforced inside the home because, again, a child isn't born knowing how to do anything. It's conditioned response. So when they're 2 and they say half, then you set a dynamic of where that child is going to use that term in a way you don't like when he or she is 7 or 8, and then it's going to be a problem then. It's the laissez-faire attitude, in my opinion, that people have with their children that's contributed mightily. There's also, in my opinion, a structural deficiency. I'll take you back. And, George, when did you graduate from high school?
1968.
Okay, so just a common point of reference. So you were in the 60s. I was in the early mid-70s.
Okay, old school.
Exactly. So you remember then there was a time where there was no discussion. You follow the rules. When you didn't follow the rules, you got sent to the office. If you got sent to the office a number of times, whatever the number of times were, and of course that was contingent on who you were, you got expelled. Remember those days?
Yes.
And those days seem to be completely unattached to revenue. The kids have now figured out what the deal is, and the deal is simply this. They know when they have to be in class to be counted as tardy.
Second period.
They know that the state and the district gets revenue from them being there. They know that there's only certain amounts of kids that can be expelled because the district has caps on expelling students. And so there's no real consequences to their acting out. And so that you've taken now the cap off. And so now their behavior is unchecked. And so that's why you have so many problems.
Well, basically, you went right back to the definition of discipline, about consequences. The consequences aren't there. Now, also, you got into an area that I was going to discuss later about behavioralist theory. Have you heard of behavioralist theory?
Yes, I have.
Well, that came in vogue in the late 60s and early 70s. And the positive side of behavioralist theory is self-esteem and positive reinforcement. But nobody ever gets around to the negative side of behavioral. And that is that the theory is that you don't pay attention to bad behavior and it will extinguish itself. By paying attention to bad behavior, you're actually rewarding bad behavior. And this worked its way into the American psyche and into our schools. So now you can't really tell a young person, you're a bad guy, you're doing bad things. You just did some bad things, but you're a pretty good guy. So these things work all the way through. Now you go down to the 2- and 3-year-olds, you got temper tantrums. Now, just to give you an example, and I know what happened, if you got out of line in a grocery store, out in public, in the 50s or 60s, what were your parents going to do to you in public?
You got whacked immediately.
Right, and it was accepted. That's it. You showed respect. You did not misbehave. And as a parent, I'm in control. Our parents were in control of us. But through this behaviorist theory, I remember I had a boy in class, and the parents came in for the parent conference, and I'm talking to dad and said, you got to kind of try to get after your boy about this. And he's hitting kids, and he's kind of a bully and all that. He said, Coach, I smacked him around a little bit. I gave him a pop or whatever. And my son called up CPS, and they came by, and they told me if I ever touched them again, they're going to take away my other kids. He said, Coach, I'm out of the discipline business. So that's how it's worked through our society.
Now that you brought that up, though, George, and before that, I have to remind people, folks, this is a call-in show, 713-526-5738. Again, the number is 713-526-5738. 713-526-KPFT. Now, this is KPFT FM, Houston 90.1, Galveston 89.5, Huntsville 89.7, and Livingston 90.3. Now that you said that the parents don't have, I think what you're saying is that for all practical purposes, a lot of parents have lost the ability to be able to discipline the kids as Terry, you, and myself, how we were raised. In other words,
Anybody that was raised in the 50s and 60s, they understand what we're talking about.
Right.
You go to a department store, and a kid starts acting, I want that toy, starts screaming, and the parent goes, oh, my goodness, he's never done that before. Give me a break.
Right.
That's the way that kid acts all the time. He has never had the discipline to say, you're not going to act that way. I'm going to change your behavior. Now,
but how do we get around that, George? I mean, you gave the example of the CPS getting involved because the parents don't have much discipline problems. How are you going to discipline that kid in school then if there are so many restrictions and discipline now? And then we take something that I didn't know that Terry just mentioned about the the time periods when a kid is counted
right
there, and also the amount that can be expelled. How are you going to go into there and tell folks how we can get into that school? And we earlier we said inner city schools, but there are a lot of these other schools out there that have a lot of discipline problems as well.
Oh, there's lots of discipline problems, and it shows up in the news. And then the first reaction that people watching is said, where's the administrators? Where are the teachers?
Right.
They've been overwhelmed by problems, and they have to react to major problems. And now that gets into the bullying and everything else. I mean, but the process is that when you start getting out there and you start lecturing and pester, you're going to find out that 99% of the kids are rational, can think, and can change their behavior. I'm going back to the figure. If you get 99% of the kids in the class under adult supervision, we're on the path the right way.
Well, I tell you what, the reality is this. Nothing is better than something that has actually worked. And I think one of the things that really got me into getting you on this show is that you told me you did this. It worked in Austin High School for the time that was it Austin High School?
Right.
For the time that you did it, and it worked effectively, and you actually you could actually show the numbers. So tell us a little bit about exactly what you did there.
Well, I mean, it's about getting out in the hallway. Actually, the one time that I did it earlier with some other teachers, and like Terry was saying, I had to compromise. We were out in the hallway passing periods, working this, and eventually we got it under control. Now, you get into school politics, but this principal had to leave after a few years, and another principal came in. But part of the process was that I got 4 duty stations in the school. In other words, I didn't have PE, I didn't have history, anything like that. For every 500 students, the principal was allowed to have 1 duty-free station. So, in other words, I worked the school hallways all
several periods.
Yeah. And I did this by myself with no help from the administration or the assistant principals or the police officers most of the time. And it's just about getting them into class and doing this thing and start checking the behavior. And so within about 2 months, we're down to where there was nobody in the hallway. 30 seconds after the bell, nobody in the hallway. And when you start out with 1,500 kids that don't go to class, then that's a change.
Now, what did you do specifically to these kids to let them have the respect for you to actually want to do that?
Lecture and pester. I mean, maybe, like, if you're a student in the hallway, Roberto, why are you out here in the hallway after the bell? Now, the way you respond to me is kind of tell me if you're a good guy or a bad guy. Alberto, respond.
Right.
Why are you in the hallway after the bell?
None of your business.
Well, I'm going to make it my business. We're trying to have a better school here. Now, that's not a very polite way to respond. I mean, that's not
right.
But, we're going to have a better school. And he can buck up to me and everything like that. I'm not worried about him right there. I used to chase kids all over to school when I was younger, and I was playing rugby, and that was like, hey, this is where I get my training for rugby. But I learned, hey, he can do that. He can run away from me. I'm starting to change behavior. The next time I catch up to Egberto, you're running around all throughout the school. I'm going to take you to class. It's about establishing control. And then if I have to, I go get a police officer, and we catch up to him, and we walk you to class. We show you that you can't control the situation. We as adults control the situation. But what you have to understand is that 99% of the kids want discipline. They want a nice school. When the school gets under control, then they're happy. They give you a thumbs up. They smile at you because they want a safe school. And that's what I'm saying, Terry. These communities want a safe school. That Jones High School, those parents are active now. They want a safe school. And it didn't take that much time because kids changed their behavior. They understood that the justice system or the discipline system was going to catch up to them. And I didn't have to do all the office stuff. There wasn't any DRC and all this. And then part of it is establishing manners. Umberto, excuse me, sir, we're going to go to class. And now I work to get a yes, sir out of you. So we understand we start establishing manners, which is what you do in the 50s and 60s. And this is everywhere. And in the 50s and 60s and 70s, black communities, they had respect. They had honor. And they worked with their kids. They had pride in their communities. And it's all based on having discipline. And that's where that thing about a village to raise a child.
It takes a village to raise a child.
That's talking about everybody is responsible for the discipline. And then the adults make sure the kids followed a certain path.
Terry?
Well, I'm going to sound like a contrarian. I just fundamentally disagree with the whole village.
Go ahead.
And the only reason being, it's just my personal experience. And these new behavior things always come down to this for me.
Mm-hmm.
If new behavior methodologies are really necessary, then why has authoritarianism worked for the Army for a couple of hundred years? Why has authoritarianism worked for most militaries in some of these cultures that are much older or in martial arts for over 4,000 years? And that's because it works.
Can I weigh in on something? I'm sorry, gentlemen. I just graduated from college, and I want to say that I've experienced. I don't want to say I was the problem child. I don't want to say I acted out.
No, but actually, I think your input is that input is, I think, what we want here. I'm curious.
Because I've seen kids act out. I've been that kid in the classroom who has gone to class on time and who has not, I didn't like it when my teachers got on to me because, my parents were very hands-on in my education. And I think that had to do with my, other extraneous things in my life. That was the reason, but no excuse necessary. But Terry, from what I was understanding about what you were saying is why the authoritarian, method has done so well in the Army and has done so well in, I believe you said martial arts, is because my belief is that those people, in one way or the other, signed up for that. And I feel like in school it's a little bit different. No one likes to do what their parents tell you to do. And school is one of those things. And so I think that, the reason the authoritarian, works better is because, at 18 here in America, you can sign up if you want to. And I think that but you don't really have a choice in school. And I think that, and also there's other extraneous, I think I said that word right.
You got me.
We understand it.
Yeah. I think there's other circumstances that play into that and how a child views school. And, it's not always the best view of school because no one wants to go and sit in a room all day and, learn about things you really don't care about. But I think it's it's got to deal with the parents. I think it has to deal with the teachers because, if a teacher doesn't want to be there, who's to say that you want to be there? It's just, it's a lot more things, but my personal view on it, I don't want to feel like I'm attacking you, but is that, the difference between the military and school is because, the military, a little bit, you signed up for it. And so that's a choice you made, the freedom, and I don't feel like school is like that.
Terry?
The problem comes in, and I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Roxy.
Yeah, I this is not an attack on you, and I certainly welcome your opinion. But then being the resident, almost oldest guy on the phone here.
Hey, come on now.
My crotchety old man perspective. And that's simply this, really. You feel, and a lot of people your age feel, that your compliance is an option. You feel as though if the teacher can't find a way to personally engage you with whatever issues you're dealing with and craft a methodology or a teaching dynamic that reaches you individually, that you have the option to opt out.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
Here's my issue with that. Out there in this system, because if you don't buy into the system, you're discarded. And then there's another person who comes along who will fit that cause.
I agree with that, and that's what I've.
And so, well, let me finish my point though. And so this affording this divergence from this, what I like to call the standard methodology, or the methodology back in the 50s and 60s when we were younger, some of us were younger, is the root of the problem. Because I can promise you, neither George nor Egberto or I ever felt as though we had an option to diverge from the pathway, because there were consequences to diverging from the pathway that we didn't want to endure. And your generation has people who enable your divergence with all of these psychological maladies that ensue, and give you, in my opinion, not you particularly, but give your generation cover for their divergence. For example, Egberto and I have talked many times. We never had anybody that was ADD when we were in school. That term didn't exist when we were in school. Now, human physiology hasn't changed much in the last probably 50,000 or 5 million years. So you can't tell me that there's this sudden malady that's manifested itself that's called attention deficit disorder. In my opinion, that is just a methodology for pharmaceutical companies to push another drug treatment regimen on people. And because it alters your neurochemistry, once you take that drug the first time, you have to take it and continue to take it to function.
I'm curious to this, because when you spoke about ADD, I saw a head shake or something like that.
Okay, well, I mean, I beg to differ, because I am one of those kids. I'm the ADD kid. I was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder when I was in 4th grade, and I took it all the way up until I graduated college. And I agree with you, Terry, in certain senses that not everybody gets diagnosed properly. I think that ADHD is a very loose term, and that's the new term of ADD is ADHD, is when not only you can't concentrate, but you're really hyper. And I do believe that there are different ways to, how do I better put this, to deal with certain people. I know, like for college, it's a very common drug. People, will take, Adderall or, whatever any of those ADHD or ADD medications to study. And I was one of those kids who I took it all the way through 4th grade up until high school every day so that I could go to school. And it turned me into a little bit of a different person. I don't necessarily agree that you have to take that drug to function, but for me, it helped me do my schoolwork, because it was something it didn't interest me. It did not, my schoolwork did not interest me, did not hold my attention. I would, my teachers could visibly tell that I was not, when I was in 4th grade, I was not there as a student.
Let me bring in a thing, and then I come back to you, George, on something else, because, and, I'm no psychologist, no expert or anything like that. But what always bothers me is, and this is where Terry and I think are in lockstep, where we talk about not in our days, not having those types of diagnoses, because I guess it wasn't it just wasn't the case. My question is, why are things so much worse now than it was then? I mean, again, I'm looking at it empirically, right? In other words, I'm looking at it in the aggregate. But sometimes you have to wonder about that. But I want to go back to George for one specific reason. One specific reason. George, how much of remember what Terry had to say about how our discipline was in our days. How does that change? Listening to Roxy, who thought that she needed to have that to be able to concentrate. How much of that was the discipline problem that you actually saw in the hallways? How much of it was real?
Well, I'm in between on both. I used to get all the special ed classes because autistic kids generally like swimming, and it was a good environment, so we got that. But the AD, what is it?
ADD, ADHD.
Well, with the H in
is it? What is it?
It's. I mean,
hyper,
you're just hyper and you can't pay attention,
okay.
And so it's got so many different names to it now.
Okay.
I've seen it from different angles. I think the science is there, maybe the medication is there, and it helps to a great degree. But at the same time, I think it's an easy way for schools. They label and they circumvent the problem. So I think there's a little bit of that going on too. I remember I was over at University of Houston, and I was doing summer swim league, and there was a couple from Jamaica, and their kids were just the greatest, most polite, and I think that was the culture there. And they were talking about two kids that came from America, and they were diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, 11th grade or something. And first day, got homework, came back the second day, and didn't have their homework. And went to the office, got 1 or 2 pops, at that level, 11th grade, and it turned out, she said, they didn't have it. Oh, sorry, I'm pounding the table. And turned out they didn't have attention deficit disorder.
Mm-hmm. So
somewhere in there, there's a control issue. It's an easier way to medicate, and it's about, we were talking about before, you have to stand up and say, no, you're not going to act that way.
Folks, this is KPFT FM 90.1. The number is 713-526-5738, 713-526-KPFT. We have Terry on the line. We could use some more folks on the line. Terry.
Yes.
Now, I think listening to what George had to say, I think we're all somewhere in between there with thinking that, yes, there may be this ADHD that Roxy was talking about, but just maybe a lot of it is the easy way out. In other words, as opposed to working on discipline, the first thing you do is
they don't have the discipline.
Right. In other words, and then you just throw a drug that kind of. What does it feel like when you're on these drugs?
For me, I was very task oriented. Mm-hmm. I could sit down and listen to a teacher and, do everything I said. I was very, obedient. I was stimulated, in a more like a professional sense. But, I moved to Houston I haven't taken the drug since I was in school in July, and so it's going almost on a year now, and so I don't think I need it to function, and I don't like the way I am when I'm on it. And
okay, that's what I wanted to explore. When you say you don't like the way you're on it, does it change your discipline? Does it change?
Yeah, it totally does. I'm a very much more quieter person. I'm not so out there. I'm my mom did not like me on it, especially when I got into high school, but she said I was like a shell. I didn't have anything inside of me. I just come home from school. Yeah, I was a zombie. I would come home from school and do my homework, and then at the end of the day, I was drained. And granted, in high school, you just go from class to class to class, and you don't really do so much as you do in elementary school or middle school. But I was just drained from just sitting and talking, and I mean, not really talking, but I was just drained from sitting there and listening to a teacher. And I don't like what I don't like it how I am when I'm on it. I much prefer my life when I'm off it. But, and I think a lot of people are very misdiagnosed. All it takes is a discipline problem. And that's what, my parents and my teachers did. They exhausted all efforts before they realized, okay, there might be something a little bit different. And so I'm not saying that everyone should be on, who's hyper and can't listen to a teacher should be on this, medication. But I feel like there are some instances like myself, because I also went to a psychiatrist and I did all of these cognitive tests and did all these tests, and I could tell when I'm okay, I just can't sit here anymore and do this, stupid puzzle. And so I think yes, I agree with you guys that there are some people who are misdiagnosed and you don't need medication to get your child to sit through class. But I feel like, for me, I just felt like, there are some cases in the world that are a little bit different.
Okay. That drives us now to the politics of this subject. Let me ask you this: earlier we were speaking about what these guys like the Bushes and so forth that are actually from above coming down to give dictates to how schools should actually function, as if that can make a difference. Politically speaking, why are they wrong, George?
Well, I call it Ivy League thinking, private school thinking. The people that are following or driving our education policies, everybody went to private school. Everybody, and how do they determine success? Is, well, you pass the test. They all pass the test. Nothing's bubbling up from down below, where you're in a hard situations and this, and they think they can solve the education problems by testing. We test to find out that we got a problem. And like I was saying to you, I remember watching MSNBC, and Jeb Bush was on, who's supposedly a great architect of the Florida education recovery, whatever. And he said, well, we test and we find we got these problems. And the person with him said, well, how are you going to know when you've had success? He says, oh, I really don't know, but we'll test. We'll test to find out if we're successful. So, I mean, it's all about testing. There's more to a student when he goes to school than just testing. We're losing out. When Sputnik came out in 1957, all of a sudden we're in a race with the Russians. And teaching was like, oh, we got to have more science and math and all this. And the teachers just suggested. They didn't have to test. We just started working harder because we're out to beat the Russians, if you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
You probably weren't around.
Well, I wasn't.
That was a race. But it wasn't, we weren't testing to see this. And then we were behind their system. They had all this rote learning and everything's going on. But teaching is creativity. It's not the Common Core, and it's not just 5 subjects a day. Bloomberg up there said, well, we got to cut down on the salary of PE teachers and music musicians. That's what makes school fun. That's what creativity. That's what kids will go to school for. I mean, and we're getting off it. I mean, when you have the discipline, you can have more of these things. We didn't get a chance to talk about a lot of these things. I mean, when you have discipline, then you can do different things. I mean, but the creativity, that's the fun stuff that's going to keep kids in school. Schools today are boring. It's rote learning all day long, and now we're going to test. And
I need to ask you something because I think it's important what you just said. You said there are a lot of things we didn't talk about, and you're correct. And looking at this sheet here, there are a lot of things that I think we probably can cover, but I think it all breaks down to from your tenet is that once we solve a discipline problem, a lot of other things fall into place. Ultimately,
every other problem can be solved.
And so now we're kind of
give me a problem.
No, I believe you, but but let me just ask Terry something here. Terry, you know what the discipline problem is in school. You know what the educational problem is in school. George, I think, says correctly that they're interrelated. I think you have a little bit. You are a little bit tougher than how George addresses the issue, but I don't see them as being similar.
No, we're in the same path.
Yeah.
We're in the same path. Terry's a disciplinarian.
Right.
He has a certain thing. One of the advantages that he has is a selective class. If somebody doesn't come up to standards, well, we can go. If you're going to be a behavior problem, you can leave the class. Public education doesn't have that. They take everybody. You don't know, you got a probationary in your class, somebody who came from prison, you got to take everybody. This is one of the problems with charter schools. They're selective. Charter schools can't live without public schools.
Because they choose who they want. So, Terry, you're going to...
He's a disciplinarian. I'm a disciplinarian. We're in the same boat.
Okay, well, that's good. So, Terry, how are you going to solve the discipline problem, Terry? In these difficult... and remember, what I'd like to concentrate on is like inner city schools. Well, how would you start it?
I would start by having a meeting with, so for example, let's use Lamar.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a name that's familiar. I would have a meeting with the Lamar parents.
Well, Lamar is a successful...
Yeah, he said he's using it as an example.
Well, I don't like Lamar as an inner city school. Lamar has the facilities. They have millions of dollars more every year on their budget than a normal school in the Houston Independent School do. Let's go with Jones. Let's
say Milby then.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, so let's say Milby. I'd have a meeting with the Milby parents of all the kids at the school 2 weeks before the start of school.
Okay.
And the following would be said. Number one, we're going to have a dress code. Number two, there will be no alterations from the dress code. Number three, if your child bullies one person one time, they will be dismissed from school. And there will be an absolute zero tolerance to these policies. We're not here to engage your child's individual issues that he or she may have. We are here to provide the best education to the broadest amount of students in the quickest amount of time for the least amount of money. And anything that takes us off that job and that message is problematic. So if your child can't come to school and stay focused on that line toward getting his or her education, then we're going to have to send your child somewhere else. Because let's say Milby has 4,200 students. We're not going to let 200 students dictate to the other 4,000. We're not going to let 200 students with their individual problems and their individual issues and their individual screwed up home lives take away an educational opportunity for the other 4,000 students.
Okay, let me ask that.
Well, I like the number 200. In that school, see, now we can talk about successful schools and schools designed for failure. Every semester, you've got half the school has a failing grade in something, can't be part of the activities of school, which is another subject. But you're talking about 200 kids that you're talking. Well, you could suspend or you could expel 500 to 1,000. And when you do that, they get out in the community, and what happened at Austin High School, the community came to us and asked, please don't expel so many people, because we got hard-working families here doing 2 jobs. They're not home during the day. These guys are coming out in the afternoon, and they're breaking into houses and robbing the hard-working people of our community. Please don't expel so many people. What do you do now?
When did school become the human warehouse for recalcitrants and ruffians and ne'er-do-wells? That's not the function of the educational system, to warehouse people who can't function in society.
Well, that's what I was saying. Your discipline there, see, that's why I'm saying the discipline that I apply, we keep kids in, we get them in class, we get them under control, we start to teach them manners, we make them understand that they're responsible for their own behavior. It sounds so simple. It sounds so simple that it can't work, but it works.
Okay.
You're going to go through the system. You're going to do the numbers and all that, and you're not going to win.
I'm running low on time here, but here's what I see. Okay, based on listening to the two. It seemed to me that, and I understand when Terry says the school system is not there to be the parent, but I think in society today, and I had this discussion with a few people on the internet. I think I got another call that we can probably get in rather quickly. But anyhow, there is a discussion I had on the other side that came in, and it went this way. It is true that the school is not designed to be to be the parent. The problem is there aren't a whole lot of parents anymore. And in not having a whole lot of parents anymore that are doing their jobs, what do we do in society? I think society is going to have to take that place. I really do. Yeah, go ahead. A quick one. All right. You have 5 seconds, my friend. Go ahead.
Great show, Alberto. Here's an issue, and there's a lot of issues you brought up. One issue I was thinking about is conceptualization, and let me just pack that up for you. Remember when you first realized that those people in the planes way up high, the jets way up high, were small, and or that they were people your size?
Yes, I do, and you got me 10 seconds because we have to go hot, but thank you.
Okay. Just one point I want to make. Perceptualize through toys, infantile toys like those little ABC blocks, except allow these childs to perceptualize molecular forms.
Thank you, my friend. Gotta go, but you guys were wonderful. We are out of time. I ran it tough. I messed up on that one.
Thank you very much for listening to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Williams. You can personally reach me by sending an email to egberto@politicsdoneright.com. Remember, Egberto is spelled E-G-B-E-R-T-O. Change starts with you. 90.1 KPFT gives you information not tainted by corporate interest. Please visit kpft.org and contribute. Let's ensure continued access to real information and news remain available to all. Again, thank you very much for listening to Politics Done Right.
Increasing world temperatures, extraordinary droughts and floods, and changes in weather patterns have made it clear that we cannot continue to power our civilization with fossil fuels. Not, that is, if we wish to leave to future generations an environment anything like what civilization has adapted to in the last several millennia, but what to replace them with. Fossil fuels provide 80% of the world's energy. The most promising renewable sources, wind and solar power, are intermittent, subject to the vagaries of the weather, and require large storage systems in order to provide continuous power. Join us this Thursday at 3 p.m. on Thresholds for a conversation with Dr. David Criswell, co-founder of the Lunar Solar Power Project. We'll discuss his proposal to collect solar energy on the moon and beam it back to Earth with microwaves, replacing all the sources of energy we now use with reliable electrical power. And we'll consider the relative costs and trade-offs of collecting our solar power on the moon or doing it here on Earth. That's this Thursday.